I wasn't invited to my own son's birthday party, so I sent him the gift that made him gasp in silence, a copy of the updated will with his name removed. Under the heavy shade of the porch, the sun just starting to sink behind the spruce trees, I stood still, absolutely still. A slick, hot splash of red paint clung to my scalp, slid down my forehead, over my shoulders, soaking into the knit of my shawl and the hem of my long old-fashioned skirt. It stung my eyes, not because of the chemicals, but because of what it meant. I did not flinch. My fingers were still curled gently around the ribbon of the small, square box I had spent hours wrapping the night before. "Happy now?" Eric sneered, his voice cold and amused. "That ought to match the rest of you. Cheap, outdated, useless." I blinked, not at the pain, not at the humiliation, but at the words. He stood there smirking, like he had just won a bet. "Do not come to my birthday," he said, louder this time, in case the neighbors missed it. "You're an embarrassment, just a leftover. I don't need a leftover." Then he leaned in, still grinning, still holding the dripping bucket. "Let me help you redecorate, Ma. You're just an old can of paint, used up, stinking, and disposable." I said nothing. My fingers trembled slightly, the way they always did when my blood sugar dipped too low, but I did not loosen my grip on the gift box. The red had already soaked through the ivory wrapping, melting the gold ribbon into pink strings that clung to my hand. Inside that box was the last thing I ever thought I would give him. Our family photo album, all 38 years of memories I had stitched together, with every breath, every meal, every unpaid bill I covered for him. The first page held a letter, written just 2 nights before. "Happy birthday, Eric. I'm proud of you. Always." Now the ink was bleeding into the cardboard like tears. Just 3 days earlier, I had taken out all the legal documents, the deed to the house, the land my late husband and I bought in Sitka back in 1972, the savings account that I never touched, even when I had to pawn my wedding ring. I had called Eric over, made him tea, laid everything out in front of him. I had said, with a smile that still hurt to remember, "After your birthday, son, everything will be yours. The house, the land, the saving. It's my way of saying thank you for the years you've carried this family." I thought I saw something flicker behind his eyes when I said that. I thought it might have been love. Now I knew it was calculation. Merlin, my daughter-in-law, stood at the door with her phone raised, laughing behind the lens like it was all a prank. "Oh, wow," she said. "This is perfect. Abstract expressionism right before dinner. You're a whole performance piece, aren't you, Ava?" I looked at her, not with anger, but with a quiet kind of grief. I remembered the week she miscarried her first child, and I sat at the foot of her bed, holding her hand through the night, while Eric was away on business. I remembered the soup I made her, the words I whispered to help her fall asleep, and now she was filming me like I was the joke at the center of her evening plans. I turned without a word, not a whimper, not a tear, only the steady sound of my wet shoes pressing against the tile as I walked toward the gate, leaving a trail of red footprints behind me like petals crushed under heel. I did not look back. I did not have to, because I already knew that if I turned around, what I would see would break me. Entirely. I got into my old station wagon, still smelling faintly of vanilla from the air freshener I hung in 1998, and drove home slowly, the box still on my lap, soaked and sagging like a ruined promise. When I got home, I did not undress. I did not wash. I went straight to the kitchen sink and turned on the tap. I unwrapped the box as gently as I could, but the paper tore in pieces, melting at the edges. The photos inside were slick with paint, the ink already running. One of them slipped out and fell into the basin. It was the photo of Eric at 4 years old, riding on his father's shoulders at the state fair, holding a cotton candy bigger than his face. His smile was as wide as the sky. His hands clutched tight around his daddy's ears. My husband was looking up at him, full of joy. I remembered taking that photo. I remembered the way the breeze carried Eric's laughter across the field. Now, the red stain crawled across the image like blood. I picked it up, stared at it. It would never come clean. I placed the photo back in the box, carried it carefully into the living room, and sat down in the worn rocking chair my husband built for me before Eric was even born. I reached under the cushion and pulled out the small tin box where I kept my will. I opened it. I stared at the line. I, Eva Hoffman, leave the entirety of my estate, including real property and financial assets, to my son, Eric A. Hoffman. My hand hovered over the line for a moment. Then I picked up the pen. But I did not write. I tore the page, once, twice, 3 times, until the name that once filled me with pride was nothing but shredded paper in my lap. And I breathed, not from anger, but from relief, because for the first time in my life I realized something. I had given everything to a child who no longer remembered where he came from. But I still remembered who I was, and that would be enough. When I was a girl, I used to sketch my world on the back of grocery receipts and paper bags. Trees, animals, my father's hands, my mother's worn slippers, whatever felt permanent to my small eyes. My first paintbrush came from a second-hand store in Anchorage, a gift from my Sunday school teacher who saw how I stared too long at the stained glass windows during Mass. By 32, I had my first gallery show, small, local, but mine. At 35, one of my oil paintings, a silent portrait of a fisherman's widow watching the sea, was chosen as the cover of the Alaskan Historical Review's anniversary edition. It was a quiet honor, but it made me feel real. Then came Eric. I was 37 when he was born. A miracle, they said. A child after 2 miscarriages and 1 long winter of depression that I never spoke aloud. My husband built him a crib by hand. I gave up my brushes. It's only for a few months, I told myself. I'll go back. But months turned to years. Canvas dried in the garage, brushes stiffened with old paint. My hands, once steady with detail, became rough with laundry, chopping boards, and wiping tears. Eric grew fast. He was a spirited boy, restless, sharp, always asking for more, and I gave it to him, every time. When my husband died in a work accident, crushed beneath collapsed scaffolding, Eric was 12. I didn't cry in front of him. I sold my last 3 paintings to cover the funeral and pay off our mortgage. Art won't feed a boy, I told myself. Then came my mother-in-law. Stroke, paralysis. The smell of antiseptic and bedpans filled my hallway for 8 long years. I bathed her, fed her, sang to her when she forgot who I was. Eric was in college by then. He rarely came home. "You're not still wasting time with that painting stuff, are you?" he asked once over the phone. "I mean, you're pushing 70, Ma. Maybe focus on being useful?" Useful. I swallowed that word like spoiled milk. It stayed in me, turned to acid. Still, I kept the peace. I kept the house. I kept the calendar on the fridge marked with all his business trips and Merlin's birthdays and the due dates for their 3 kids. Then one day, an email came. The Historical Review was hosting a retrospective of former cover artists. They wanted to feature my painting again 50 years after its debut. I printed the email, set it beside a pot of tea, and waited for Eric to stop by. When he did, I told him, gently, proudly, that I was thinking of attending. He didn't look up from his phone. "Thoidi me?" he said in a flat voice. "Don't go playing that starving artist card again. Nobody cares about some old oil painting in a room full of other nobodies. It's embarrassing." "Embarrassing?" I whispered. He shrugged. "Focus on being a good grandma, a normal mom. That art stuff, it's just a phase you forgot to grow out of." That night, I folded the email into a square and slid it into the back of the old Bible on my shelf. I did not go to the exhibit. When Merlin moved in after marrying Eric, she brought a lot of change. She had opinions on the curtains, the food, the way I spoke too softly, the shape of the dining table. But what broke me, what truly broke me, was the day she walked into the den and saw my late husband's painting of me, pregnant, barefoot, smiling at a bowl of cherries. She called it haunted. "I'm sorry, Eva, but I'm not comfortable having that thing in my house. It's gloomy. The baby's room is next to this one. I don't want the vibe getting in." I nodded, took it down, wrapped it in cloth, put it in the attic. Later, I overheard her telling her friends at a barbecue, "I'm not letting her hang that creepy Depression-era art in my house. Looks like she painted with blood." They laughed. I rinsed the dishes. Then came the bankruptcy. Eric had made a bad investment, some tech startup in California, all buzz and no substance. They were 3 months from foreclosure. Merlin came to me in tears. Eric came with silence and sweat down his temples. "I don't expect anything," he said, "but if you could help, I'd pay it back, I swear." I opened the safe that night. Inside was a painting, one I had never sold. A scene from Sitka, the dock at dusk, light catching on the water like silver ribbon. It had once been appraised at $80,000. I called a collector I had met decades ago. He came the next morning. He paid cash. I gave it all to Eric. He said nothing for a moment, then gave me a pat on the back and said, "Thanks, Ma, you're a real one." He never brought it up again. I never saw that money again, but I did see them build a deck that spring. A new deck, with a fire pit and a TV screen for outdoor movie nights. That was what my painting became. A place to watch Marvel movies under the stars. I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. Until today. Until the paint, red like shame, thick like old blood, ran down my neck and stained the ribbon of the gift I had wrapped by hand. Until the boy I carried for 9 months and raised for 40 years looked me in the eyes and said, "I don't need you." Until Merlin, with her phone out, laughed and called my humiliation performance art. Until I stood, soaked and shaking, and realized that maybe I was not needed, not in their world, but that did not mean I was worthless. It only meant I had been looking in the wrong direction. That night, I did not cook. I did not clean. I did not call anyone. I went into the attic, took down every painting I had wrapped in cloth, and lined them up in the hallway. I looked at them like old friends I had not spoken to in decades. They waited for me. Quiet, patient, unlike my son, unlike his wife. I slept with the lamp on and a brush in my hand, and for the first time in years I dreamed in color. I spent the rest of that day in silence. The kind of silence that grows heavy, not peaceful. The kind that sits on your chest and doesn't let you breathe properly. I peeled off the soaked clothes, layer by layer, in the laundry room, standing on the old tile floor that had warped slightly over the years from too many winters. I turned on the sink and watched the red paint swirl into the drain like blood circling before disappearing. The shawl my mother had knitted for me, the one I wore every holiday, was ruined. The silk blouse I saved for special occasions, gone, but I did not cry over fabric. What gutted me was the box. It sat on the counter, sagging at the corners, waterlogged and bleeding red. The ribbon had dissolved into a thin pink thread. I untied it carefully, not to save it, but to honor what I had once hoped it would mean. Inside, the photos clung to each other like wet leaves. The ink had run. Smiles blurred. Childhoods melted together into ghostly outlines. The note on top, the one I had written with shaking hands and hopeful heart, was now unreadable. I laid everything out on a towel. I tried, uselessly, to separate each photo without tearing them further. I whispered apologies to them, these memories that didn't ask to be ruined. I sat there for hours. No one called, no messages came through. I checked my phone more than once, though I told myself I would not. I had been removed from the family group chat. The little circle that had once held photos of grandkids and Sunday brunches was now locked behind a silent wall. A wall I had built, unintentionally, by loving too long and forgiving too quickly. At 9:37 p.m., I turned off the sink and walked to the living room. I made myself a cup of weak tea. The house felt too large, every creak in the floorboard a reminder of how full it used to be. I passed by the hallway mirror and caught a glimpse of myself. Hair still stained faintly pink at the roots, skin tired, shoulders slightly hunched. My reflection looked like a stranger I had once known well, but now barely recognized. I held the tea in both hands and sat by the window. Outside, snow had started to fall, gentle and unbothered, as if the world hadn't just shifted under my feet. That was when I opened the drawer beneath the lamp. The soft creak of the wood made me wince. I reached in and pulled out the small tin box, silver, dented at the corners, but still sealed tight. Inside it was my will. It was not fancy, just a few notarized pages, printed and signed. I had updated it last spring when Eric had taken me to lunch and said, so casually, "I just want to make sure things are in order for you, Ma. You know, legally, for peace of mind." Back then, I took it as concern, a grown son being responsible. I did not realize it was paperwork with a price. Now, under the soft yellow light of my table lamp, I unfolded the document and read every line slowly. My eyes paused at the part that named Eric Alexander Hoffman as the sole beneficiary of my estate. The house, the land in Sitka, the savings account I had never touched except to help him. I stared at that name for a long time. Then I reached for my pen. I uncapped it, held it over the page, but I did not write. Instead, I tore the page in half, then in quarters, then into shreds so small they looked like confetti. I gathered the pieces and placed them in the fireplace. I did not light them yet. I just watched them sit there, quietly, like the ashes of a story I had told myself for too long. That Eric was still the boy who hugged me tightly after nightmares. That Marilyn was still the young bride who held my hand after her miscarriage. That family, by blood, by marriage, by decades of shared dinners and holidays, was unbreakable. I saw now how brittle it had become, how they had drawn lines around me, quietly, until I was outside the circle. It was not the paint that ruined me. It was the precision with which they cut me out and called it kindness. I walked upstairs to the attic, once again. It was cold. The light flickered when I turned it on. I stood in the middle of boxes and dust and time. Then I reached into the farthest corner and pulled out the trunk I hadn't opened in over 20 years. Inside, my canvases. Old works I thought I had said goodbye to. Pieces I had wrapped in soft cloth and stored away, telling myself they didn't matter anymore, that Eric and the house and dinners on Sunday were more important. But now, those dinners had stopped. And these paintings, these quiet survivors of a younger version of me, they were still here. I unwrapped one. It was the dock at Sitka, in early morning fog, a fisherman's boat gliding across water like it was skating on glass. I traced the brushstrokes with my fingers. I remembered who I was when I painted it. A woman in love, a mother in bloom, an artist with something to say. I had buried her under motherhood, under sacrifice, under silence, but she was not dead, just forgotten. I brought the painting downstairs and set it by the fireplace, not to burn it, to remember it. Then I picked up my tea, now cold, and sat back down at the table, and I whispered out loud to the silence around me, "You were the light of my life, Eric, but light, when misused, will burn." The snow continued to fall outside. The house remained still. But inside me, something was moving again, something slow, something strong. Not revenge, not anger, just clarity. And clarity, I had learned, was the first step toward freedom. It had been 3 days since the paint, 3 days since the silence, since I'd heard a voice in this house other than my own, since I'd felt anything other than numb resolve and cold tea between my fingers. That morning I opened the curtains just enough to let in the gray daylight. I made oatmeal not because I was hungry, but because I needed the ritual. I sat down at the kitchen table where no one had joined me in months, and I let the quiet stretch long enough to remember a voice I had not heard in years. A little girl's voice. "Mama says I'm too loud. She says I ruin the house." I remembered the tiny figure with tangled hair and bruises that looked like shadows under her skin. She used to sit on the porch steps after school, holding a coloring book with no crayons. Macy, the neighbor's child, daughter of a man who drank like it was his job, and a mother who disappeared more than she stayed. I began watching her after school when she was 7, quietly at first, a sandwich here, a bandage there, then more. Eventually, she started calling me Granny Eva, though I never asked her to. She learned to bake cornbread in my kitchen. She learned the names of colors in my old paint box. She learned how to braid hair, how to read labels at the pharmacy, how to pray without feeling foolish, and most of all, she learned what it felt like to be safe. I hadn't spoken to Macy in nearly 10 years. She had moved away after college. The last I heard, she had a job in Juneau and a little boy named Caleb. But that morning, something in my bones told me to find her. It took only 15 minutes to locate her on Facebook. I sent her a message, short, unsure. "Hi, Macy. It's Granny Eva. If you're free, I'd love to hear your voice again." She called within the hour. The moment I heard her say Granny, the tears came, swift and soundless. She did not ask why I was reaching out. She just said, "I've missed you every day." We talked for nearly an hour. Then she said something that made the world tilt slightly back into place. "If it weren't for you, Granny, I don't think I'd still be here. You were the first person who made me feel like I mattered, who said I was worthy of love. You showed me what a real home felt like, even when you didn't have much yourself." I didn't speak right away. My hand trembled against the receiver. She continued, "You don't have to be alone. Not anymore. You can come stay with us. Me, James, and Caleb, we've got a guest room, a big yard, and we'd be so lucky to have you. Please, don't spend another winter in that house by yourself." I laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard in my own throat for a long time. "Are you sure?" I asked. Macy didn't hesitate. "Granny, you saved me. Let me return the favor." When the call ended, I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by paintings and empty walls and memories that no longer felt like comfort, and I knew what I had to do. That night, I sat down at the table and pulled out a fresh set of papers. No more shreds, no more hesitation. I rewrote my will. Not naming Macy, not naming anyone. Instead, I created something different. I drafted a transfer of property to the Women of the North Foundation, a nonprofit I'd quietly donated to for years. They ran group homes for elderly women who'd been abandoned, neglected, or simply outlived their usefulness in the eyes of their families. They were women like me. The home I had scrubbed and loved and starved to keep when Eric was little would now be theirs. I called a real estate attorney the next morning. I told him I wanted the house sold at a symbolic $1. "Just enough to make it legal," I said. He did not ask questions. He only asked when. I told him before my son's birthday, because some gifts are better given to strangers who understand their worth. Later that afternoon, I went to the attic again. This time, I searched for a specific painting. It took a while, buried beneath years of dust and old clothes. When I found it, I sat cross-legged on the floor and just stared. It was a portrait of Eric at 6 years old, painted by his father, the last canvas he ever finished before the accident. Eric was sitting in a sandbox, legs crossed, cheeks puffed with laughter, eyes closed mid-laugh. My husband had captured the light so perfectly, it looked like Eric was glowing from the inside. I had kept that painting hidden for decades. Eric never knew it existed. I had meant to give it to him when he had his first child, but by then he had already stopped seeing me as anything but a burden. Now, I decided the world deserved to see that boy. Not the man he became, but the child he once was. I reached out to the Alaska Artist Collective and offered the painting for public auction. The proceeds would go to the same foundation receiving my house. I included a letter to be read at the auction. "This painting is not just a portrait. It is a reminder that even those who grow bitter were once capable of joy. Let this piece fund shelter for those whose children have forgotten their faces." I signed it simply, Eva Hoffman, Mother, Artist, Survivor. When I folded the letter and sealed it with wax, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the kind that no apology could ever lift, the kind only self-respect can dissolve. Later that evening, I packed my suitcase, 2 sets of clothes, my sketchbooks, and the photo of Macy at her college graduation, the one she mailed me years ago with the caption, "You were the reason I made it." That night, I slept beside the fireplace for the first time in years, surrounded by my paintings, warmed not by wood, but by purpose. Blood makes you related, but kindness makes you family. The invitation never came. Not in the mail, not as a call, not even as a text. I knew the date, of course, how could I forget? Eric had made sure the entire town knew. The front of the event center boasted a gold banner. "Celebrating Eric Hoffman, ni Pufa Dolamanca, Entrepreneur of the Year, Husband of the Decade." It was being held at the Birch and Cedar Country Club, the kind of place I once cleaned toilets for on weekends to make ends meet when Eric was little. Now he was renting out the ballroom to celebrate himself. Macy offered to drive me past the venue that evening, not to torture me, but to help me see it with both eyes open. "Closure," she said gently. I stayed in the passenger seat, gloved hands folded in my lap, watching through the window as guests in heels and tuxedos laughed their way inside. Ice sculptures glinted under the chandelier light. A valet took keys from a sleek black car. Merlin stepped out wearing a satin gown that must have cost more than my first car. She posed for photos, her hand resting on Eric's chest, smiling like she had just won something. In a way, she had. She had won the part of his life where I used to belong. Macy parked 2 blocks away. We waited in silence. The package I had prepared was already inside. I had mailed it 2 days earlier, certified and insured. Delivery confirmed at 5:14 p.m. I timed it perfectly, just before dinner was served, when the room would be full and attention would be fixed on the presentation. And there would be a presentation. Eric loved putting on a show. They projected a slideshow onto a massive screen in the ballroom. Baby Eric, toothless and drooling, Eric at graduation, Eric with his first car, Eric with his first office. Voiceover narration gushed about his relentless ambition, his loyalty to family, his humble beginnings. Every image that once included me, cropped. In every birthday photo, it looked like he had baked the cake himself. Not one mention of the woman who held his head through fevers, who covered his tuition when he failed his scholarship, who sold her last unsold painting to save his marriage. I was not erased. I was deliberately removed. After the video ended, Merlin took the mic. She began her speech with tears in her eyes. "I'm just so grateful," she said, voice quivering, "to be married to a man who understands what it means to build a legacy. Eric doesn't just create wealth. He creates love. He creates family." The audience applauded. Then the MC interrupted with a special announcement. "A surprise delivery has just arrived from Mr. Hoffman," he said, lifting a hand-carved wooden box onto the table. "We're told it's from his mother. I should have prepared him. Perhaps he thought it was a heartfelt apology or inheritance, so he dared to open it on stage." Laughter rippled through the room. Someone joked, "Maybe she's finally giving him that painting money." Eric smiled, but it was tight. He opened the box in front of everyone. Inside, 3 items. First, a folder containing the revised will. The first page had Eric's name at the top, then crossed out in thick red ink. Below it, in firm, unmistakable handwriting, was a new statement. "I, Eva Hoffman, being of sound mind and clear intention, revoke all prior designations. No inheritance shall pass to Eric A. Hoffman." Second, a photo carefully wrapped in parchment. He unfolded it slowly. It was the painting, The Good Son, Eric at 6 years old, painted by his father, laughing, glowing, innocent. Underneath it was a brass plate etched with the title, The Son I Remember. And finally, a card. Simple. Unfolded in silence. He read it aloud, though his voice cracked halfway through. "If you feel loss, my son, imagine how your mother felt when you threw her away like an empty can of paint." The room fell utterly still. No one clapped, no one laughed. Merlin reached for Eric's arm, but he pulled it away. He stood there, red blooming in his neck, jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he might cry. But he didn't. He dropped the card back into the box and walked off stage, leaving Merlin frozen beneath the spotlight. I imagined her standing there, palms sweating, teeth tight, wondering if anyone was still watching. Wondering how she would explain this to her parents, to the investors in the room, to her perfectly curated online following. But I did not feel pity. Outside, in Macy's car, I let out a breath I had been holding for 3 decades. "Was that too much?" I asked softly. Macy shook her head. "It was just right." We drove home in silence. The stars were out now, and they looked nothing like spotlights. They looked honest, permanent, the way love should have been. The morning after the party, I woke up before dawn, not from worry or grief or habit, but because something in me had shifted. I felt it deep in my bones, the kind of stillness that comes not from giving up, but from letting go. I made coffee, strong, black. I sat by the window and watched the world stretch into daylight. Then my phone began to buzz. Once, then again, then a flood. Voicemails, texts, emails from unknown addresses. Facebook messages from names I did not recognize. The kind of activity I hadn't seen since Eric was born. And I mailed out baby photos to half the state. At first, I ignored it. Then Macy called. "Granny," she said, her voice breathless. "I think you need to see this." She sent me a link. It was a video. Poorly lit, a little shaky but clear enough. The moment the wooden box was opened at Eric's birthday party. His face when he read the will. Merlin's frozen expression, the crowd's silence. The video was captioned, "She gave him everything. He threw her away. Now she's taking it back." Within 3 hours, it had been shared 10,000 times. By noon, it had passed 1 million views. But that was only the beginning. Another clip surfaced, grainier, crueler. It showed me standing on Eric's porch, drenched in red paint. Merlin's voice in the background, laughing. "Performance art! She's dripping in expressionism!" Someone had filmed the moment. I never knew. It had been posted online weeks earlier, under the title, "Boomer Drama Queen Gets Owned." At first it seemed like a cruel meme, quickly forgotten amidst internet noise, until the will reveal turned it into proof of betrayal. But now, recontextualized alongside the birthday footage, the caption had changed. The thinned-out mother he humiliated was the same woman who saved him from bankruptcy and raised him alone. Comment sections exploded. She gave him everything. He gave her a bucket of paint. I hope that man never sees a dime. What a disgrace. Someone find this woman and give her a goddamn monument. And then came the third wave. A still photo posted by a guest from the party. The painting, the good son. It had been hung at the back of the ballroom, away from the main displays, but as guests lingered, someone had noticed the brass plaque beneath it. Donated by Eva Hoffman. All proceeds to benefit Women of the North Foundation. That photo was retweeted by an art historian with over 400,000 followers, who wrote, "This may be the most poetic act of maternal justice I've ever seen." Suddenly, journalists were digging. Local news stations were calling the venue. Bloggers tracked down the story, connecting the dots. My name was trending on Twitter. Someone called me Alaska's quiet storm. I turned off my phone, not to escape it, but because I had already lived the story. Now the world was simply catching up. But there was one moment I did not expect. Later that afternoon, the owner of the Birch and Cedar Country Club, the man who had personally accepted the painting's delivery, asked to speak with me. Macy put him on speakerphone. He sounded choked up. "Mrs. Hoffman, I don't think you remember me," he said. But I did. His voice rang a bell. "Charlie?" I asked. "Charlie Benson? From Elm Street?" He sniffed. "I used to mow your lawn. You gave me your husband's old coat one winter when I didn't have one. You used to leave sandwiches on the porch and tell me I could take 2 if I needed." I swallowed hard. "I remember," I said. He went quiet, then continued. "I was raised in foster care. After my mom passed, the Women of the North Foundation gave me a room. They helped me finish high school, sent me to culinary school. I wouldn't have a business without them." He paused again, then said, "Your painting raised $32,000 in a silent auction last night. That's going to fund 6 beds for 6 women who don't have anyone. You just changed 6 lives." I blinked, stared at the kitchen wall as though it would respond. Then he said the words that cracked something in me. "You gave them a home, Mrs. Hoffman, something your own son forgot to do for you." I did not cry. I only said thank you, softly. After the call, Maisie walked in with her laptop open. "You should see this," she said. She pulled up a live stream, a local news anchor standing outside the downtown law offices where Eric had just been dropped from a major contract. The headline below read, "Investor pulls out after viral will scandal. Hoffman firm faces backlash." The anchor reported that a venture capitalist group had rescinded a $2,100,000 0-cents investment, citing ethical concerns and reputational risk. The reporter used words like unprofessional conduct, domestic disgrace, and personal instability. But the one that stuck with me was what they called him at the end. Alaska's worst son. The phrase took root online like wildfire. Memes appeared, side-by-side images of Eric in a tuxedo and Eric as a crying child in the painting. Captions like, "From golden boy to red flag, Mom painted him better than he turned out." Even Merlin wasn't spared. Within days, her employer, an upscale interior design firm, issued a statement. "Due to public concerns surrounding recent viral footage involving our associate and the unacceptable treatment of a family elder, Merlin Hoffman is no longer employed by our firm." She tried to defend herself online, claimed it was a misunderstanding. But screenshots don't lie. nor do captions of laughter beside a humiliated woman dripping in paint. Their downfall wasn't loud, it was steady, relentless. The kind of public reckoning that no PR firm could spin. And through it all, I said nothing. Not a whimper, not a tear. I did not post a statement. I did not grant an interview. I sat in Macy's kitchen, with Caleb coloring at the table beside me, and I sipped hot cocoa like it was the only thing that mattered, because while they scrambled for damage control, I had already rebuilt something they could not touch. Peace, dignity, a home that did not require my silence, and most of all, the truth. A truth that did not scream. It just sat there, quiet and bright, like a light Eric could no longer dim. It happened on a Wednesday morning. The kind of morning where the sky hangs low with clouds that don't threaten rain, just quiet judgment. I was sipping tea in Macy's sunroom, watching Caleb play in the yard, when the pounding started. 3 sharp, frantic knocks, then fists, then shouting. I froze. Macy was already at the door, her shoulders square, her eyes hard. When she opened it, Eric stood there. Not the Eric I remembered, the laughing child, the proud teenager, even the tired young man who once brought me daffodils on Mother's Day. This was a man unraveling. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled. Behind him, Merlin stood clutching her purse like it was a life preserver, her face blotchy from either rage or tears, or both. "You have no right," Eric snapped. "None of this was yours to ruin." Macy didn't flinch. She stepped outside, pulling the door half shut behind her. "Granny's resting," she said, calm and slow. "You don't get to be here." "You think you're family now?" Merlin barked. "We're her blood. That counts for something." Macy blinked once, twice. Then she leaned in, just enough for her voice to cut through the cold air. "She is my family, and you're just a stain on the last page of her story." Eric's face turned red. "You think you can erase us? This circus online, it'll die down. People forget." Macy raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because last I checked, every job lead you've had since the party won't even return your emails. And your wife, oh wait, ex-wife now, has a lawsuit pending from her last employer for misrepresentation of character." Merlin's lips parted, but no sound came out. "You humiliated her," Macy said, voice steel now. "You used her. You made her believe that silence was grace, but it wasn't. It was survival. And she's not surviving anymore. She's living." Eric stepped forward. That was a mistake. Because Macy had already filed the paperwork. A restraining order, signed, stamped, and in effect as of 2 days ago. By the time he reached the steps, 2 squad cars were pulling into the drive. Macy had already filed a protective order 2 days earlier, after he'd been harassing Granny with calls and emails. Cops stepped out, calm but firm. "Sir, step back. You're in violation of a protective order." Eric turned, sputtering. "I just want to talk to my mother." "You forfeited that right," Macy said. Then she stepped aside. The officers approached, asked for ID. Merlin started to cry. Eric argued, something about misunderstandings, media manipulation, entitlement. But the law had no interest in his theatrics. In minutes, Eric was in handcuffs. Merlin, too. They didn't scream. Not this time. The cameras did it for them. Local news vans had followed the story since the painting went viral. One happened to be nearby, filming a community spotlight, when the scanner picked up a disturbance at Macy's address. By sunset, the footage aired statewide. Eric Hoffman, former Businessman of the Year, arrested for violating a court order and harassing an elderly woman. Merlin, too. They both looked small, not like villains, just like cowards finally caught in daylight. That evening, Macy sat down with a reporter on the porch swing. I watched from the window, wrapped in a shawl that didn't smell like paint or dust or silence anymore but lavender. The reporter asked her, gently, "What do you want people to know about your decision to take Miss Hoffman in?" Macy didn't blink. "She didn't choose us by blood," she said. "She chose us with her heart." She paused, looked at the camera, "And I chose her back." The headline ran that night, "Justice in Silence, the grandmother who chose peace over blood." I didn't speak much that day. I didn't need to. The world for once was speaking for me. Eric and Merlin would face court, charges for elder harassment, violating a restraining order. public disturbance. Nothing sensational. Nothing that would ruin their lives, but enough to make sure they didn't ruin mine anymore. Enough to ensure silence would never again be mistaken for submission. And as for me, I watched Caleb build a little tower of sticks in the yard. He turned to me, held up one of the twigs, and asked, "Granny, can you make this into a dragon?" I smiled, not because of revenge, but because I could, and because no one could take that away from me again. The new house smells like cinnamon, not because we bake every day, though Macy does keep apple bread on the counter like it's a law, but because Caleb spilled a whole jar of scented sugar on the radiator last week. The scent stuck. No one's complaining. The neighborhood is quiet, just far enough from Sitka to hear birds instead of traffic, waves instead of sirens. There's a maple tree outside my window that turns the whole yard gold in October. Caleb calls it the fire tree. I have my own room, my own chair, a drawer full of sketch pads, but more than that, space. Not the kind you measure in square footage, but in breath, in permission. I am not a guest here. I am not tolerated here. I am home. Most mornings, I wake before the others. I sit on the porch with tea and a pencil and sketch the morning light. Sometimes I draw the mountains. Sometimes the chickens. Sometimes just the way Macy's curtains flutter in the breeze. Once a week, I teach a free art class at the community center. It started small, just a few kids, mostly quiet, mostly shy. Now it's a full class. Children in wheelchairs, children with autism, children who do not speak but draw entire worlds with color. We paint in silence, mostly. They don't need me to explain brush techniques or shading rules. They need me to be steady, present. I teach them what my grandmother once taught me, that a line does not have to be perfect to be powerful. At the end of every session, we sign our names. They sign theirs with glitter pens and crayon dust. I sign mine with paint. From the brush of someone they once called a discarded can of paint. Sometimes the children laugh at it. One girl asked, "Who would say something so mean?" I told her, "Someone who forgot what a masterpiece looks like before it's finished." She nodded and kept painting. One of the paintings, a forest of blue trees under a pink moon, now hangs at the Maison of Mothers. Yes, that's what they renamed the house. Maison of Mothers. It opened last month. I visited on opening day. They kept the porch swing, repainted the front door mint green, turned the living room into a shared kitchen. Each bedroom now has a name instead of a number. The Ava room, the Agnes room, the Nora room. Women live there now. Women who were left behind after lifetimes of giving. Some walk with canes, some carry oxygen tanks, but they all walk taller than they did before. I stood in the hallway and looked at the photo wall, smiling faces, arms linked, aprons dusted in flour. No plaques, no shrines, just women, free. I left a small canvas on the dining table that day. It was simple, a single red brushstroke across a white background. And underneath in quiet black letters, what they tried to stain became my signature. When I returned to Macy's that evening, Caleb ran out to hug me like I'd been gone a decade. "You're back," he shouted. "I always come back," I told him. And I meant it. Because I am no longer chasing anyone. Not Eric, not Merlin, not the versions of them I once hoped might return. They tried, of course. After the arrest, after the headlines faded, they sent letters, called from burner numbers, even sent a bouquet. White lilies, ironically. But I sent everything back. No return address. Just a note that read, "Your silence was louder than any apology." Sometimes at night, I think about the boy Eric once was. The way he used to sleep with his hand curled around mine. The way he used to ask if monsters were real. I want to tell him now, yes, they are. But the scariest ones live in entitlement, in the belief that mothers are required to suffer in silence, forever. I used to think I lost my son, but I know better now. I never had him, not really. What I had was a version of him, a hope, a dream, a sculpted idea of love that never truly took root, and that is okay. Because I am not empty, I am not erased, I am not a discarded can of paint. I am every color I ever gave away, now returned to me. This is not revenge. This is restoration. And as I sit in the backyard, watching Macy and Caleb paint signs for the fall festival, I feel the brush of wind against my cheek, like a whisper. You are still here, and that is enough. They called me a leftover, said I was just a can of paint, used up, unwanted. But let me tell you something. I've still got enough color left to change lives. So if you've ever been thrown away, ignored, humiliated by the very people you once gave everything to, I want you to know you're not alone, and you're not done. This world forgot how much power lives in the quiet woman in the corner. The one who remembers everything, the one who doesn't shout but outlasts them all. If this story stirred something in you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it. And if you're ready for more stories that speak the truth out loud, finally, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Because revenge has no expiration date, and when a grandma speaks, the world listens.